What up, guys? Today, I want to take some time to go over this foundational program that I used with one of my fighting athletes. He's a kickboxer. Because it's so foundational, I think it would apply to almost any type of martial arts athlete, or almost any athlete for that matter. We're looking at a pretty decently trained, fit individual here. Male, 21 years old, has quite an extensive sports background, but definitely not an extensive strength training background. All his strength training experience kind of stems from doing some strength training himself in a gym randomly. They chip in during kickboxing training. He's pretty fit. He's pretty explosive. I tested him, had him on force plates, good concentrically, and pretty good reactively, but needs to up all strength levels. Kind of dealing with somebody that moves very, very well, but just is at the beginning of making a strength gain. So it's a pretty foundational program here. We opted for a 3-day program here. That also means we're doing basically everything every time. So we're doing a little bit of plyometric speed work every time. We're doing a major lift, lower and upper. We're hitting some accessories. He was dealing with some minor shoulder injuries as well. So those are taken care of in the program. And we're doing some neck stuff at the end as well, but I'll go over that in a bit. The reason we're doing 3 days only, not because I think that's a hard rule, but this guy is still training quite a lot. About 4 to 6 training sessions still. That's also why we haven't really added in any structured conditioning work. He is pretty fit. That hasn't been one of the culprits during his matches. We're really focusing on strength training here. Now, let's go through these days quickly. As you can see, we always have a warm-up. Now, depending on the athlete, I might prescribe this or I might just let them loose. Now, in this case, for him, just stabilize some stuff again, really open up the shoulders and do some easy plyometric work to get everything flowing, especially because he's a fighter. He'll be bouncing a lot, so it's good to do a little bit of quality work and just accumulate some volume in low doses here. Day 1 is slightly more of a neural focused day, lower reps, a lot of explosiveness, starting off with some mat ball throws and then some depth jumps, drop jumps. I put it in as depth jumps and drop jumps. Usually I'm just working on technique, so we'll do drills. This is the day he does with me, so I just put it in there as a reference, but we'll kind of see how he goes. So initially we'll just do some kind of broken down version of this where we land, stick the landing a few times, then start working on doing some drop jumps or step jumps with a longer ground contact time. We really stick to landing before we go into more for height. When we go into the reactive stuff, we might initially go for a lower effort output, so we dial in the technique, but he's a very competent mover. We didn't have to go through much of a progression here. Next up, we do some power clean work, so some loaded speed and power work. This is always the progression I like to follow. We start with the fastest bodyweight stuff, move on to more power-based loaded stuff, and then we'll do some back squatting after this. So hand power clean work here. He picked that up very quickly, so moving on. Usually if I give these programs to somebody, I'll put in the notes, I'll give them directions, what the loading should be. I'll go over that in a different video. This is a sheet we already use. Those notes are not in here at this point anymore. Also, this was a day with me, so we kind of monitor it. But as a very rough guideline, week 1, basically we want just like RPE 7 type effort on the weights. So we have some runway for the next few weeks to up everything. With plyos, I do want intent. Now, that doesn't mean I need like a full blown out effort every time. Initially, I want to make sure that we do the exercise as well. But for all the plyometric exercises, we mainly just focus on just going fast, going high, going hard. So here we go, power cleans, and we go into a back squat box jump, so contrast set, so we can really trigger that nervous system, load him up. This is a power day, so the volume is pretty low, even lower than later power days might be, because he's still early on to this type of training. I don't want to overload him yet, but I could see a more developed athletes easily do like 5 or 6 sets here. We do a little bit of trap bar in a split stance, 3 reps per side, just to get some unilateral loading. And then we do some upper body bench press work. I like these type of prescriptions where we do 2 sets for 8 and then the same weight, and we do a max set. Usually the max sets like with a few reps in reserve, so we can kind of auto-regulate strength progressions here. And then we end up with some shoulder work. This shoulder work will come back. Usually I tend to program this in ahead because in my experience, if I just give somebody a few exercises, which is kind of standard practice and which is something I always used to do these 2 exercises or these 3 exercises, they kind of sandbag it or they forget about it or they do them sporadically. By just adding them into the program and really making them part of the program, they tend to stick to it a lot more. So looking at day 2 and day 3, so day 2, slightly more volume here. Again, we do a little bit of power work. It's a little bit more pull dominant. So our main movement here, both a shrug and a deadlift, a little bit more posterior chain focused. Clean shrugs, just to get a little bit of trap development in as well, which I think is very important when it comes to stabilizing the neck, and just some power stuff as well. Like we see that the derivatives of the Olympic movement are very well suited to create power. So again, like every day, a little bit of power, don't overload it too much, considering the training volume he's already doing. Bulgarian split squats, isolating the legs without overloading the back still after the deadlifts. Now, on the deadlift, you might notice that it's relatively low volume. That's because I'm not a huge fan of heavily loading and doing high volume on things like deadlifts and squats with athletes. Not because I think they're inherently risky, but they do bring along a slightly greater risk when it comes to things like lower backs. So I'm not aiming to get them to become insane deadlifters. I want them to have a very strong posterior chain. I want to load the central nervous system, which I think we can do in about 2 or 3 sets. After that, I think other movements to target specific body parts might be slightly safer, just reduce the injury risk a little. Again, when it comes to athletes, my job is not to make them the best deadlifter or squatter. My job is just to get their legs really strong or their body really strong to execute on their sports. Therefore, with these movements that are slightly riskier, usually they are really good at getting that neural stimulus. So I will keep them in, just not at crazy volumes. Which is also why on this day we Bulgarian split squat and don't squat again. He does do it with a barbell, but the load's so much less that that's not really an issue. So here we get into some rotational work as well, which is key and I think often overlooked in a superset pattern. You'll notice that I use supersets quite a bit because I feel they're very time efficient to do, especially with smaller muscle groups, opposing supersets or even kind of like redundant supersets here where we have 2 core rotational movements. Or just an effective way to use your time. With a lot of these guys, we have an hour and a half, maybe. If I can squeeze in just a little bit more work without making it into a full-on conditioning workout, like a CrossFit workout, then I think that's a good thing. We finished this day off with some more core work. I'm quite a big fan, really targeting the core separately, like really training it as a muscle and not just relying on major compound lifts to create strength there. So some weighted sit-ups here, some back extensions, because we do want to train the lower back and I do really want some extension flexion there, just not always with a deadlift. So this is a great way to keep building that back up without overloading too much on the deadlift. And then again, finishing off with some shoulder work. And then the last day, slightly lighter on the legs mainly. We do some rotational jumping work as well. It's a single leg lateral jump with a rotation. Basically, you jump off to the side of one leg and land with your face the other way, like 90 degrees. And we do some single leg tuck jumps, which is something we build up. We do a bunch of continuous high impact plyos because this guy was just kind of up for it. If this would be somebody with a lot less control or who's a bit less strong naturally, we would probably do something like single leg pogos or hops on the spot to build it up. And then here, kettlebell swing, part of that like plyo circuit. Not a huge fan of doing kettlebell swings, but he's doing this day at home. I didn't want to put a barbell in his hands, but I did want kind of like that posterior chain dominant speed focused movement there. That's why it's in there. So we have these 3 movements combined to really work on that power. Push press, really working on extending that chain, followed by a back squat, 5 sets, 4 sets, and then a max set again, using that max set again. Now it's 2 reps in reserve. It's in Dutch here. 2 reps in reserve to maintain some distance to failure. So here we do a back squat, 5 sets. I want him to get competent at the movement that comes back a lot whenever you do strength training. It's quite an efficient movement, especially with newer athletes. I'm usually not too stressed about it doing anything, and it's very time efficient when you look at all the qualities it trains. So we do still do quite a high volume here. 4 sets of 5 and then a max set. We do keep 2 reps in reserve, but again, some auto regulation here. Same principle was used on the bend over rows. And again, here we have a little bit of anti-rotation work. And rotation, when it comes to fighters, they rotate a lot, right? They have to be able to withstand a lot of rotation, but also create a lot of rotation. So we train that. And then we finish off with some neck work, again, like a superset, hitting the neck from all sides. Now, I haven't been too specific here. For him, initially, we do it from an isometric perspective, but then he went out and bought one of those neck trainers. So I do program it in, but I kind of let him loose on that a little. And then if we look at the next few weeks, these are just progressions on whatever we did. In some cases, the complexity of how we jump might change a little, but on most cases, we're basically just doing a linear periodization, trying to push the weights a little bit every time. And as long as that works, that's the easiest thing. I don't want to add too much volume. I'd rather have him train harder, become better at his sport, than spend more time in the gym. If at some point we identify that certain body parts are not responding or certain patterns are not responding the way we want, then potentially overloading volume or progressing volume over time is something that we'll look into at this point. He's just going up, 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 week on week, so there's no need for me to add any volume. Lastly, in week 4, or in his case, week 5, usually we'll do this in week 4. I think there was something with a holiday coming up, which therefore it made more sense to deload during the holiday. But usually week 4 or 5, we deload. This means we still try and hit every major movement at least once a week. We still try and hit a little bit of the intensity, but at about 80% of what we did, we drop some sets and reps there usually, or just reduce the total workload. So we do still get a stimulus. Also, again, because we're dealing with an athlete that hasn't got like an extensive strength background yet, deloading is really precaution. So initially we can be a little more loose with it, basically just take a step back, reduce the volume a little bit, reduce the intensity a little bit, and then pick back up in the next block. With more experienced athletes, this will usually become more extensive, really depending on what the athlete needs and how he or she responds to it. So that's the overview and some of the thoughts going into creating a program for a kickboxer. A lot of these things are common strength and conditioning principles. Here we haven't included conditioning as part of the program yet because he does that already. In a future video, I might go over that. This is very similar to what I've done in the past with, for instance, an athlete in judo. Like, most principles will stay the same. Only once they become more experienced are we really gonna make it more focused. Initially, we're just working on all the major strength qualities. Sure, we look at what the sport needs and does a lot to create some accents in the training. But it's a pretty straightforward way of just building general preparedness.